But let's get started. And the first chart I'd like to focus on is the Bible itself, what the Bible says. And as you can see, train up your child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 22:6. And it says, you know, Jesus loved children, didn't he? You know, he did most of his healing on grown-ups, a couple on children, rose a couple of children from the dead. But you know, everybody wanted to keep the children from him. Remember the apostle? But he says, suffer the little children. Let the little children come to me, and do not forbid them, for such is the kingdom of heaven. So he loved children. He loved them so much that he gave a very stark warning. He said, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. He loved his little children. And you know, if you think about it, Jesus did more healing than he did preaching. He loved all his children of all ages. So there's a very special affinity for children from a biblical standpoint. And so we should appreciate that. And some of us unwittingly, now I don't want a millstone hung around my neck, even in the shallowest part of the sea. And some of us unwittingly are causing some issues. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on it right now, but one of my favorite authors outside of the Bible said that, you know, God is the author of both the moral law and the natural law. So it's very important that we give them both very special consideration. This author goes further. Now, don't throw any rocks at me. Goes further to say, to go against the natural law, his natural law, is an insult to God. And it's a sin. And that's why I said, so whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it's better to have a millstone hung around his neck and cast to the bottom of the sea. So what we're going to talk about is the 7 tips for gaining the victory over 2 major health issues, ADHD and children's behavioral problems. In the process of this, we'll talk about some of the specific health issues, but this is a particular problem. For those of you who were here earlier, I talked about I have 3 kids that are older than most of you out there in their mid to late 40s. And I have 2 young kids, a 16-year-old and an 11-year-old. And when my 16-year-old, when he was first going to elementary school, he didn't have ADHD, but he couldn't sit down. He had so much energy. He couldn't sit down. Sitting down is not a natural act for people with a lot of energy. And the teacher recognized that, and she knew that I was a naturopath, and she worked with him. But she had some kids that had some real serious behavioral problems. And we used to talk about it, who had real ADD, ADHD, had behavioral problems. And some of the clients, I have grandmothers that are bringing their grandchildren to me. Just recently, a case I'm thinking of is a grandmother brought a first grader who was just suspended from school from fighting with the teacher and throwing a chair at it. There are some very serious behavioral problems going on. And interestingly enough, the reason why I bring these 2 up is this teacher, 2nd grade teacher, was when my son was in the 2nd grade, and she believed in natural health. She said, could there be any connection? I said, of course there's a connection. So she started sending them to me. And these kids, they were turning from misfits and problem kids to A students. And one of the things I started doing was testing them versus their siblings. And there is a clear connection between diet and issues and kids' ADHD and behavior. There is not an HDA boogeyman out there that's randomly flying around and spontaneously jumping into certain kids. There are clear dietary and lifestyle causal and contributing effects. So that's why I want to focus on this. And you see the kind of problems we're having with kids, the behavioral problems, etc., in the school, in the home, etc. So that's what we're going to start with, these 7 tips. And the first tip is avoid sugar as much as practical. Now, if you remember the hierarchy of nutrients, what was the very last food group? Of the 5 food groups, it was processed foods. And we talked a little bit this morning about sugar, counterfeit sugar versus real sugar. And we are sugar babies. We love sugar. Okay, we thrive on sugar. The brain needs sugar. We talked about that. But we need the right kinds of sugar. The kind of sugars that aren't isolated sugars, not the refined sugars, which we'll talk about. And there was a study that was done. And it showed, I don't know if you can read this, it says the dietary history of reform school children reveals that the diet of their choice is sweets, cakes, and caffeinated beverages. Now, we talked about caffeinated beverages this morning. And all foods prepared with sugar. Foods that overstimulate the adrenals. This is a real good book. This should be in every family's house. Sugar Blues by William Duffy. And in his book, he basically looked at reform school students. And he divided them in 2 groups. One group, he let them go to the candy machines and eat whatever they wanted to. The other one, they put on a vegetarian diet, a natural diet. And what he found out as a result of that, there was a 70% improvement in recidivism in the whole food natural diet group than in the other group. Recidivism means those that leave and come back to prison. 70% improvement. So of all those that left, in the one group that came back, 70% did not come back. Only 30% came back. So a significant improvement. And the diet of choice was these overstimulating, the sugar pops, the sugar frosted flakes. And I'm going to show you some of these hand grenades that kids are putting down in their stomachs unwittingly as we proceed. But this is the single biggest issue. Okay, looks like, okay, trying to get the timing down. Okay, what are the problems with sugar? Sugar, it stimulates hyperactivity. But us adults, we can control that a little bit better. We've developed defensive mechanisms and ways of coping. But it really weakens the immune system. We'll talk about that in a little bit of detail, but it can lead to socially acceptable behavior, as we talked about, emotional problems, violent behavior, affects judgment and decision making. We talked about the brain and how it affected this morning. And it develops addiction-type tendencies. Let's look at sugar. Sugar actually goes through some 23 different processes before it reaches your table. It starts out as most of it is cane or beet sugar, but then as it goes through the refining process, it becomes molasses, then brown sugar, and finally, all the way at the end, it's refined into this white crystal, this sucrose, that winds up on our table, and it's chlorinated. There's all kinds of things that they do to kind of bleach it, etc. But these are the 4 major processes. The key here, though, that I wanted to share with you is that sugar is similar to heroin processing. Sugar starts out, as we said, we talked about that, but look at heroin product. It starts out as the juice of poppy. Anybody addicted to poppy seeds around here? Yeah, anybody that has a poppy seed? I gotta have my poppy seed. Anybody need a poppy seed fix? But you go to the next step, it's opium, and then morphine, and then refined into heroin. As you keep going down that process, and you keep going, crack cocaine, etc., it's even more and more addictive. So the more you process things, the more you take out those factors that balance it. Remember this morning, we talked about caffeine, for example. It gives you that feeling of feeling good. It stimulates the acetylcholine. But it also produces something called adenosine to put the brakes on. It's similar with sugar. You get this high, but you stripped out all the components that kind of bring you back down. So the body has to do all kinds of things to adapt. And we're going to talk about some of those health issues that are required in that adaptation process. So the difference between sugar addiction and hard narcotic addiction is one largely of degree. Small quantities of narcotics can change the body-brain behavior quickly, right? And then as you take more and more and you mix it with other things, it can change it very quickly and be very problematic. And some of these narcotics are legal, right? Like alcohol. Caffeine. It's a drug. Caffeine. Nicotine. All of these have effects on the body. They stimulate you. Sugar takes a little bit longer, from a matter of minutes to a matter of months or years. Now, let me tell you what the issue is. Now, you don't see all kids that have sugar pops that have a problem. One of the things that we need to appreciate that we all are different. When you take this HQ, everybody's not going to get the same grade. It's kind of interesting when you go to the eye doctor. He wants to make everybody 20/20. Why? We're different. We have different abilities, different capacities, different requirements. Now, the good news is it affects less than 20% of the children. But if it's your child, you don't care about the statistics. Some kids, they can adapt better. They have better capacities and they can manage the sugar. They can cope with it better. Some can't, and those are the ones that are problem kids. And see, this is what we need to understand. And you see, you can look at kids and you start looking at there's this association. William Duffy found it with sugar, and there's some other things. But that's the issue. You have to recognize people's different capacities. We talked about this when we talked about the health continuum, dynamic vitality to debilitating health. We are different. And we need to respect and honor that. So sugar addiction is the most commonly addictive food drug in the world. As a matter of fact, a lot of you might not realize that the slave trade started over the sugar. Okay, that's, you got to have that sugar. And you need cheap labor to get it, etc. So sugar and it goes back to 600 BC when it started, when the refining process started. It causes moderate to severe withdrawal symptoms, just like withdrawing from cigarette or coffee or anything else. And you watch these kids. That's why sometimes it's important that you work with a qualified professional when you're working with some of these issues who can help you to understand this. We'll talk about fasting and cleansing, some of these things. And some people think these things are terrible. But if it's handled properly, and if you understand it and you put it in the proper context, these are very, very powerful healing mechanisms. And sugar significantly weakens the immune system. It produces an over-acid condition. It's one of the most acid-producing things that you can put in your body. Why is that a problem? The body needs to function optimally in an alkaline state, about 7.3. Sugar reduces it. So it weakens the immune system. So not only are they having problems with behavior, they're having sniffles and colds and flu and earaches, and that even worsens. You know how we get when we have a cold. We're tough to deal with. And we've developed some coping mechanisms over the years. The kids haven't done that. And so they have all of these illnesses that they don't know that they're sick. What context do they have? So they're going through and they're acting out a lot. It drains, this is important. And we'll show how it does it. But it drains and leaches very important vitamins and minerals. See, the body, when you get into this acid condition, the body has to say, oh, wait a minute, I have to get you right. The body is always working towards something called homeostasis, getting you back in balance. So you have to sacrifice your organ reserves in order to keep yourself at homeostasis, because you have this refined thing out there that's not balanced. The body, what is this? I've never seen this before. What sugar, did that come from the hand of God? That's a man-made thing, isn't it? The body's been around for hundreds, thousands. It said, what are you? And so it has to reconstitute it into something the body can recognize, or the body would go absolutely berserk. And one of the biggest things, look at the osteoporosis out there. Now, kids don't get osteoporosis, but they got all these other issues. As you get older, us big kids, it leaches the calcium from our bones. Because the body, what the body says, well, wait a minute. To get this acid condition, I need some alkalizing thing. So it takes all the calcium out of our food. So if you're doing green leafy vegetables, well, it wouldn't be leaching in the first place. But it takes all the calcium out of our food. Then it goes after our big bones. That's why after about 40 to 50 years of this, you start getting all kinds of osteoporotic issues. It inhibits the secretion of gastric juices. So let me tell you, now think of dessert. It inhibits the secretion of gastric juice, causing fermentation of starches and putrefaction of protein. What does that mean? Everything you put in your body, there's specialized enzymes to work on it. In the case of carbohydrates, you need lipase, amylase, the amylases, ptyalin. There's 3 different glands in the mouth: sublingual, the parotid, and the mandibular, submandibular. All carbohydrate digestion starts in the mouth. It secretes these juices, and then the protein digestion it starts in the stomach. Fat digestion really doesn't start until the small intestine. So the body knows these things. When it looks at sugar, it says, "Oh, wait a minute. What am I supposed to throw out of it? Amylase? It's a nothing that it records. So it goes straight down to the intestine. It doesn't put out anything. So the brain says, "Oh, you gave me sugar. I don't need any digestive juices." So you're not breaking down your foods. So the starches stay there too long, and it ferments. A lot of us, good Christians, who say they want to have nothing to do with alcohol, we're human distilleries. We're making alcohol. And we acted with these sugar highs. So carbohydrates ferment, and the proteins just sit there and putrefy. Now, the problem with that is that's a perfect environment for the proliferation of parasites. So you can start to see these, and then you see the kids with the skin problems, the zits, the this, that, and the other. It's directly related to this sugar issue. Now, so the moral of the story is if you're going to eat dessert, forget the meal. Now, I'm not encouraging you to do dessert, but it's the dumbest thing to do is to eat a good meal and then follow it with a sugary dessert. If you're going to do that much, just have a big dessert. And why waste your time with all the other fermentation and putrefaction? Now, don't go out there and run out to the doctor shop and say, "I should have just dessert for my main." I'm trying to make a point. And that's why when you eat dessert, you're not even hungry when you eat these sugary foods. The body, you're so bloated out and everything. There are little mini volcanoes going on in there. We call it passing gas and belching and all that. But there are many digestive catastrophes going on in there. That's why I said it's like throwing a hand grenade down there unwittingly. And you boop, whoop, and you what? You understand? See, what I'm giving you is a little bit of the physiology of digestion. We'll talk a little bit more about that. A lot of us, you know what's sad? Let me tell you the saddest thing there is in modern society. One of the most important treasures that we have is our health. And you can go through 12, 16, 20 years of school and never get one course on health. It wasn't until after my undergraduate degree, my MBA, my advanced business degree, 3 doctors, first start learning about health. Everybody, we spent all this time on history, geography, math. We should have a requirement that you learn the basics of how does your body work. We know all about what Columbus did and don't even know how our systems work at the most fundamental level. I love talking to teachers, and I'm trying to encourage people, principals, why don't you have a requirement for them to learn about health? There are principals right now in the United States, in Georgia, North Carolina, that are taking out the candy machines and soda machines, and their IQs and their results are skyrocketing. The behavior are plummeting. So they're starting to get it. But in all of our education, we don't spend any time on the most fundamental thing that we have, our life, our health. And that's so I'm going to try to point out some of these really basic fundamental things that nothing I said so far is anything he said, well, I need to go to school and get a PhD to understand what he's, this is easy stuff. People understand what gas and bloating and belching is. You don't have to go to school. But these are the kind of things. Don't get me started on food combining. If anybody has a question, we're going to have a lot of fun. And you'll see a lot of these things are fundamental things that we're doing that we don't even realize. Okay? So it causes a variety of health problems. So where's the sugar? I don't know if you can see this, but it's everywhere. It's in soda, it's in sugar pops, Quaker Oats, cranberry sauce, ketchup, ice cream, milkshakes, chocolate, milk chocolate, fruit yogurt, canned fruits. Boy, that's terrible. I mean, you talk about a hand grenade. I talk about IEDs, you know, these improvised explosive devices, and weapons, biological weapons of mass destruction. There's things in our kitchen. Oreo cookies, ginger snaps. Doesn't these sound good? Anybody getting hungry? But look at this. It's in cough syrup, Sucrose for children. Look at that. 59% of it is sugar. Listerine, 69%. The food industry, they earn their money. They figured out how to titillate our palates. And we do all of these things, and we get addicted to it, and we think that we're just doing fine. Going through our sleepwalk through life. So sugar is everywhere. Now you can understand why I talked about some of these books. Now this is one of the single most important charts. I have a 2-hour presentation on sugar. I'm only going to spend about 5 to 10 minutes on it. But this is one of the most important charts in that presentation. This will kind of help you to understand and put in context that last category of the hierarchy of nutrients. Why it's so devastating from a nutritional standpoint. If you remember, we talked about not only what we eat, but it's not what we eat, it's what we assimilate. And we talked about what do you actually get out of the food that you eat. And we talked about how raw foods and sprouts, you get a very high percentage of that is assimilated. And then as you start going down the line in that processing, microwaving it and processing it, et cetera, you're down to getting maybe 2% of it, or you're losing 100% of the nutritional value plus toxins. So you're not getting any nutritional effect, and people are wondering why they need 3,000 to 4,000 calories. You know how much? We need less than 1,000 calories. The reason why they're recommending 2,000 is because the food is so depleted that you need more calories. You get the little bit that you need. The Framingham study showed that, you know, with 900 calories is all you need if it's the right kind of foods. And yet we have all these bizarre things out there that say you need this, that, and the other thing. Because they are nutritionally deficient. Now, see these numbers here? Chromium 93, cobalt all the way down to the V-vitamin. You notice all of them are in the 90s. What this is saying, when you refine sugar, this is how much of the nutritional value you're losing of these very important elements. And we wonder, you know, some of the chromium, I have that on top of the list because we're going to talk about diabetes for a second. You need chromium for the functional integrity of your pancreas to produce the insulin, etc. So if you're not taking it in your food or you're reducing it, you wonder, you can see how you start running into problems. Now this is the key. Sugar is the most devastating of the processed foods you can use. The other processed foods like white rice and certain grains that are cooked poorly and beans and things like that, if you look at these same figures, it's usually in the 40 percentiles. That's why I use sugar as the example. But it points to that whole processed food. Everything that comes in a box, can, or bottle, it has some level of processing. Sugar is the most devastating of all of those. Okay. So gaining the victory over sugar, you know, eat whole foods versus the sugar-coated cereals. Now, I'm not a huge fan of cereals. And one thing about health, and one of the points I want to make is you need to make the best choices of the options available. I'm not recommending that anybody run out and empty out their cupboards and everything and get a pound of apples and start nibbling away. It's transition. So what I'm trying to encourage with these things is not the ideal diet, but making the best choices and start improving. So cereal, goes through an intrusion process. There's no natural cornflakes. When you see how they make it and everything, and they explode it, and you get these flakes and everything. But the sugar-coated are the worst. So go to a non-sugar-coated first. And so that's what I'm saying. Use the whole grain cereals. And there's certain cereals that aren't as processed, like quinoa and kamut and spelt. I know it sounds like a foreign language, and I'm not speaking in tongues. These actually exist. But there's oatmeal, there's shredded wheat. There are the more wholesome ones. Use natural sweeteners where practical. There's plenty of them. Raw and unprocessed. Honey is one of the most powerful sweeteners known to man. Honey can't rot. It's a perfect food. It has every vitamin, mineral, and phytonutrient known to man. Those busy bees have been around for hundreds of years, going around from flower to flower, picking all this stuff together. And this honey is a very rich, natural, whole sugar. Agave nectar is another one from the cactus plant. So there are substitutes. Organic maple syrup. Stevia is a plant. It's a plant that's 600 times sweeter than sugar. As a matter of fact, you have to be careful. Most people make a mistake. They go to stevia and they use the same amount as the other sugar. And it tastes bitter. Too much sweetness is bitter. And so you just need a speck of it. But they are very powerful natural substitutes, and that's the point there. So I'm not going to just talk about issues and say, well, you go fend for yourself, go and pray, and just wait until you're called to the promised land. No, there's things that you can do while you're here to make your temporal life very satisfying. Encourage natural snacks. I remember my kids, and this is kind of a sad testimony. They used to talk about, before they went to school, they used to talk about Daddy's candy. Can I have some of Daddy's candy? I used to have these dishes in the house. I used to have my dates and figs and almonds, and that was Daddy's candy. That was what I would have as my dessert afterwards. So they knew what that was. And when and then they went to school, and they found the undaddy candy. And then having kids is one of the most humbling experiences in the world. As I started to say earlier. Boy, that is tough. My 3 doctorates and a PhD was easier than raising these 2 young kids. It's amazing how fast they get to be smarter than you. 3 years old and oh no, Daddy, that's not right. They're telling me things, I see some of you smile. You know what I'm talking about. Boy, it's a humbling experience. And I come from a seminar like this, and I'm on a high, signing autographs, selling books. Daddy, you forgot to take out the garbage. I mean, they treat you like the garbage, like you're nobody. After the wife, of course, the spouses, husband, whoever the professionals are, boy, they really know how to pull you back down to earth. Manage the candy, cookies, cakes, and dessert consumption, and reward with wholesome treats. You don't have to give candy. And it's so sad, the pretty girls. I see all these pretty faces out here, all these pretty girls. And be careful, you pretty girls out there, when they start giving you chocolate around Valentine's Day. There's an ingredient in the chocolate that actually enhances sexual arousal and everything. And give all the pretty girls, give them some candy. And then they get sick and everything, and they're wearing all kinds of makeup and everything, trying to maintain the beauty, the natural beauty that God gave them. So, reward with some natural situations. Okay? So let's go to the next one. Tip 2, avoid, oh boy, I'm having some fun now. We don't have enough time to go through a lot of this. But this is another one, after dairy. Now we're working backwards up the hierarchy of nutrients. For those of you who remember that first chart, remember I said I was going to start showing you the practical application? This is the 4th food group was meat and dairy. Remember that? So this is dairy. Avoid dairy products as much as practical. So let's talk a little bit about dairy. How much do our children really need? It builds bodies, builds strong teeth and bones and all this other kind of stuff. I think I told you this morning that's my favorite food. Before I knew anything, when I made my conversion to health, I thought pizza was a health food because it had all the food groups in it. The meat, the dairy, everything, the wheat, and I was wondering why I had zits and all kinds heart palpitations, chronic bronchitis. Children are allowed to eat flesh, meat, spices, butter, and cheese. Deranging the stomach, exciting the nerves to unnatural action, and enfeebling the intellect. Parents do not realize they are sowing the seed which will bring forth disease and death. That's what my favorite author inside the Bible says. So remember I said earlier, a lot of us parents are unwittingly feeding into some very serious health issues for our children. Okay, let's look at some of the major childhood issues related to milk. Milk is insidious, and it's kind of a sad testimony. The human species is the only species that takes the milk from another species. Animals are smarter than we are when it comes to this. You know, there's one thing, and if you ask me during the Q&A, I'll tell you, there's one thing that pigs would do that won't eat, that even humans would eat. Pigs won't even eat it. All kinds of allergies and rashes, iron deficiency, lowered intelligence, school problems, right? Asthma, ear, sinus problems, hyperactivity. This one blew my mind. I used to believe that says juvenile diabetes. You know, I used to, before I learned and really had a practice, you know, if I didn't have a clinical practice for over 20 years, it'd be hard for me to believe how powerful this stuff is. And I remember when I first had my practice, and you know, I'd take anybody to come to me. And my view was God can do everything. But you know, I didn't see a lot of this, and I didn't see anything in the medical literature or anything like that, the health literature. But with juvenile diabetes, I remember this one case that I had. It was a 2-year-old kid. And they said, 2 or 3 years old, and they said the kid had juvenile diabetes. And I said, oh, okay. And in the process of talking, so when did it start? It started like 6 months earlier. I said, wait a minute, that's not juvenile. Juvenile means you're born where the pancreas is not producing enough insulin. Now I want to focus on this. I can talk about all these, and I talked a little bit about the hyperactivity. But for the juvenile diabetes, I remember working with this one parent. It was a couple that was separated. And I was doing a presentation just like this. And the guy came to me. He said, you know, that's interesting that you say that. I noticed that when I do this diet that the nutritionist recommended, the blood sugar for my child goes from the high 200s to 400 and 500. And then I do the insulin. And you said that, and it was milk. It was chocolate milk. It was so many glasses of chocolate milk a day. The sugar, it was a disaster. But anyhow, it was around that time he said, well, can you talk to my wife? Because I believe in what you're saying and she doesn't. And I remember, I felt for the guy. He was young. He was like 28 years old. He was actually younger than my kids. I really felt for him. His wife was 24, 26. And so I said, yeah, I said, I'll see you complimentary. And I remember we would go through this. And he was doing, when he did what I said, he said, wow, I noticed I don't need as much insulin. And I said, wait a minute, something's not right here. Because what I told him was, well, there's no known cures for juvenile diabetes, but we can mitigate the problem. We can stop it from progressing, and we can reverse it. I work with a lot of adults, and they'd be like on 20, 26, 30 units of insulin, and they'd be off of all of it. And so what I said to myself, I said, you know, this is not juvenile diabetes. This is early onset adult diabetes. This is a precocious child in the negative sense. Instead of getting diabetes at the age of 40, getting it at 3. And so, you know, I kept doing this. And interestingly enough, at first, not at first, the wife thought I was from another planet. What are you talking about? Can't give him milk and chocolate and all this other kind of stuff. But you know why she did it? It's kind of interesting. You got to work with people where they are. Her issue was, she was, like I said, 24, 26. It was interrupting her social life. She had to measure the food and she said, I can't do this. He's 3. She just saw this next 18 years or whatever, this process. So she said, well, let me do this. And I'd say about 6 months later, even though I was doing it complimentary, she didn't come in. And we had a couple of episodes before that where she'd come in and she said, well, you know, this is a challenge, this, that, and the other thing. So I said to her, well, if your kid wanted to go and play football out in the street, Or just go out there and roam around and play marbles or something. Oh, no, you can't do that. I said, why not? I said, well, I'm responsible. I said, well, yeah, you are responsible. That child isn't. You need to do what's right for that child. And you can see she started to get it. Oh, I see. So she said, but it's hard. I said, is it easy telling your kid come back and you got to spank them sometimes to listen? She said, oh, yeah. And like I said, she didn't come in. And when I called her up, she said, oh, I don't need you anymore. When I do what you say, he doesn't need any insulin. I said, what? The kid didn't have juvenile diabetes. So you got to be real careful about these incurable diseases. When the new phrase I'm starting to run around, there's no such thing as incurable diseases. There's only incurable people. People that aren't doing what they need to do to get right, to get back in harmony with God's laws. Now, we're going to talk about this some more, especially when we talk about blood pressure and everything. Like I said, if I didn't have a clinical practice, I've had people on 10, 11 drugs and off of it all. I don't want to even tell you how fast until I give you a little bit more information, because you're going to think that I'm making this up. But you start applying these principles and you'll see it works. Constipation, diarrhea. All of us as parents see these kinds of issues. Bedwetting, a whole host of issues, and other infectious diseases, the earaches. My kids, I don't ever remember John Michael ever burping. My kids were both home. My two young kids, my three kids, one of them is an alcoholic. He's all kinds of problems. The other one he's close to 300 pounds. He outweighs me. He has more issues than I have. So my older kids, I raised them the way I knew how. With my second set of kids, like I said, they were home births. TJ was breastfed for 32 months. John Michael, 44 months. I don't ever remember John Michael burping. TJ 2 or 3 times. The standing joke in my family is John Michael never knew what the inside of a hospital looked like until last year when we went to visit somebody in the hospital. And we used to joke about that. He's going to be 12 this month. And we were saying that ever since, because I was doing these seminars, TJ did go in the hospital once. And I used to say that, and I remember when we went, he was 10 years old, he said, oh, this is what a hospital looks like. He had no idea what it looked like. He's never been in there. And we are so committed and locked into the medical system that we need, what did we do before doctors came into being a short 200 years ago? The last time I checked, we've been having babies. Now we're so dependent on hospitals. When I tell people that my kids are home birth, they think that I'm weird. They think I lost my mind. But it's interesting how the roles are reversed. You got this very unnatural process. And women think it's natural to have epidurals, and then they wonder why their kids have problems with these traumatic births and everything. So the point is, all these different diseases are directly as a result. They were breastfed. So, even with all of the nonsense that I have to fight the school system for to keep away from them, they really don't get any real serious issues because they have that good solid foundation. The average amount of time for breastfeeding from a world standpoint is about 5.2 years. In the United States, you're lucky if you can get 5.2 weeks. So I try to encourage my parents to try to breastfeed for at least 3 months, 3 to 6 months. The body is not fully formed in 9 months. Did you know that? It really takes about 11 months. And a lot of people don't realize a lot of the sensory things like the eyes and everything, babies can't really see that well. They see shadows. That brain and that nervous system takes another 2 months. Guess what the best food for that is? Mother's milk. It has all the nutrients. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the power of mother's milk in a little while, but that's what you need. That's why I try to get them to do that 3 months, to get that good foundation, at least develop the system to a firm, solid foundation so you have a better platform to move from. Okay. So one of the big issues, where's the calcium? There's calcium all over the place. The best sources of calcium. Now, there's another one of those myths and misconceptions. You'll get all this about how there's 300 milligrams of calcium in milk. One of the things I want to share with you is that don't get confused by the facts. Yes, there's 300 milligrams of calcium in 8 ounces of milk, but you only can absorb 25 of them, or 75. Your body can't absorb it all. It doesn't have the right gearing to actually absorb and utilize it. So even though it's way more than vegetables, you get 100% absorption of what you get out of fruits and vegetables. So don't get confused by the facts. Scientists, statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics. And there's all kinds of lies out there that really are half-truths. Okay? So look at this. Popeye had it right. 275 milligrams. So you're getting way more out of a serving of spinach than you're getting out of a glass of milk. 4 times more. And even these that seem lower, because you get 100% of the absorption, it's better than what you get from milk. So there's all these misconceptions about building strong bones, protein, and there's calcium. There's no food out there. There's no plant food out there that doesn't have calcium in it. God knows what we need. And you know what a plant is? You know what a Chrysler plant is, right? You know what a Ford plant is, right? It's a manufacturing facility for building Fords or Chryslers. God's plant is a manufacturing facility for developing for building all the nutrients that the body needs. Remember we talked about yesterday we're dirty people? Yeah. Who's not dirty here? Where are we from? From dust we come, from dust we shall return. He formed us from the dust of the earth, and then he gave us this manufacturing facility called a plant. Fruit and vegetables, nuts and seeds that takes the air, water, the sunlight, and the earth, the dirt, and puts it in this manufacturing facility to keep us sustained throughout our life. So God has his manufacturing facility too. And we even call it plants. Where we go and go to the junkyard and get these broken down jalopies rather than the manufacturing facility that God gave for us to sustain our biological functions. And all of these foods, I'm just talking about calcium, but if you look at all of the phytonutraceuticals, the phytonutrients that they're talking about, all of these recent discoveries, God put it in. You know what? He even put it in the food before he made us. He set the environment before he even made us. He put everything in place that we needed before we were born. And then after we were born, there's nothing else that was needed. And then man came along. Said, well, and I don't remember him looking for Moses or Abraham or Noah, saying, get a committee for me. Get staff up a group for me. Get a colloquium together and help me to make it better. Or give me some things that I forgot. He gave us all that we need. So what is the single biggest issue with milk? I'm going to pause here. And we're going to really have some fun because I like these to be interactive. What's the single biggest issue? It's the most acid-producing, it's the most mucus-producing food you can put in your body. And we wonder about the colds and the flu and foghorn, leghorn fog. It's all of that junk, that milk that we're putting. But what is the single biggest issue? I want to pause for station identification. Anybody? What's that? Digestion. That's a good answer. Who said that? What? Oh, wow. How come? You're on the right track. You're on a roll. What's that? It's not made for you. That's true. You're on the right track. The single biggest issue with milk is pasteurization. Because the question you might want to ask, how come we didn't have these problems before the 1900s? This is a problem of civilization. All this respiratory problems, it didn't happen until the mid-1900s forward. When we had pasteurization, started in the early 90s. Good old Pasteur. Pasteur didn't do it, Greg? Oh, you don't like? Oh, we're going to have a lot of fun about Pasteur. When we talk about conventional versus that, we're going to talk about. Did you ever hear of? Well, you know about Béchamp? Oh, you can help me with it. Anybody heard of Claude Béchamp? I'm going to introduce you to Claude Bernard. Yeah, right. Charles Beauchamp. Parlez-vous français? But anyway, we're going to talk about Pasteur. He was a well, don't get me started. But pasteurization destroys, why, the first thing you want to ask, why do you have to pasteurize milk? It's a requirement. In a lot of places in the United States, you're not even allowed to buy unpasteurized milk. You have to have a co-op or something, and you get it, work a roundabout way to get it. You don't need it to begin with, but to get it unpasteurized. It destroys, pasteurization, the heat is very, very high heat. What is it there for? It's to kill the pathogens. So the first question you want to ask is, most of the cows in the United States have either what is called cancer, leukemia, or different kind of cancers and different kind of health issues. So first thing, how is this product from this sick thing supposed to make you healthy and build up anything? The pathogenic load is very high because of the antibiotics. I've never seen a cow picketing about, I want organic food. They got the worst food, and then they're sick, so they're loaded with antibiotics, and they have DDT and all that other kind of stuff. And we'll talk about biomagnification in another presentation. But you got this sick thing, so you need the pasteurization so you don't get sick immediately. And one of the things that we're going to talk about, pasteurization really doesn't work all that well. Yes, ma'am?
I visited a farm in the States, and they were feeding the cows with the herb seeds.
Oh, yeah. And you know where the mad cow disease came from? When they started feeding cows meat. This kind of issue, but no, let's not get too. But you have to have enzymes, and a lot of the very important nutrients can't live in above 102 degrees. A lot of pathogens. One of the most powerful therapies out there is heat therapy, fever therapy. We're going to have some fun with this one. Next time you get a fever, you're going to get on your knees and thank God for it. Once you understand more about it. But a lot of pathogens can't live in above 102, 103. Some of the more insidious ones, like Lyme, need 106. Some as high as 112. But milk is heated at such 160 degrees or even better. Such high heat, it destroys the enzymes that are necessary to break it down and absorb and utilize it. That's the right answer. Pasteurization is the single biggest issue, so you're better off eating the carton that the milk came in for its nutrient value. You see my point? There's nothing in there of a redeeming value. Unless you're starving to death, you don't want to touch it. And again, my favorite author outside the Bible said that cheese is a non-food. And we love our cheese. I love my pizza. I miss her today. No. Pizza, and we love these things. And we get these weird connections to it. So you can't get the proper breakdown of something. Who's that answer? How did you know that? Are you a naturopath or a wannabe naturopath? Or, who said that? What's that? Oh, you studied in my school. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Linda. Margarine? Oh, please. Homogenization. So what they do is so that we can better absorb and utilize it, they homogenize it to break it down even lower so that we can absorb. So the things that they do to get us to try to use it is actually making it worse for us. So homogenization, pasteurization, is processing. See, remember I said that you're really going to love this hierarchy of nutrients because you're really going to understand the real issues with it. It's processing. All these different processes, they're not helping us. They help the food industry. It's so bad it can't even spoil. Insects won't eat it. They know better. They know some no value. And there's a whole host of other issues. Bovine growth hormone, you know what that is, right? Bovine standing for cow. It's a hormone that they give them to help them to grow faster. Bovine growth hormone. Now look at this pretty young, what does she need cow hormones in her body for? She's having enough issues dealing with her own hormones. And she got a cow's hormones? And wondering why is this, that, and the other thing? and want to slap her boyfriend? And she's very pretty. She must be doing a lot of slapping. You understand? Bovine growth hormone. And what do kids need bovine growth? You starting to get the issue? Kids of all ages, we don't need cow hormones. Okay? Herbicides, the pesticides, and the biomagnification. I'm going to save that for another night so that we can finish this presentation sometime today. But all of these are very important issues. Tip number 4, beware of hidden allergies. We talked about milk. Another big one that we unwittingly fall into is wheat. The 2 most allergenic foods that you can put are milk and wheat. And this is what I look for in those kids. And what do they like? And I asked the question, oh yeah, he loves his milk and loves eats bread all the time. And what kind of white bread? Oh yes, indeed, it's so good. Remember those, see, some of them might be old enough to remember Wonder Bread. Bill Body, 64 different ways. And then it got down to, we started working this down. See, I come from the 1940s, so I remember Wonder Bread from its inception. And I remember around 1950, 60 years, Bill's Body, 12 different ways, and then it got to the point, I wonder if it's even bread. There's nothing in it. And it's interesting that when they call it fortified, they strip out everything and they add back in 10 and they call it fortified. So they strip out 60-something and throw in 10. Isolated. So all of these different things. Corn is another one. Chocolate is another one. I talked about chocolate, especially you young ladies. Be careful about the chocolate. Okay, soft drinks, Kool-Aid, punch, eggs. This is one of the things I was addicted to. That's another. I used to eat eggs all the time, and I used to, especially on the weekends. And when I used to wind up at IBM on Monday, I was in such a fog, because that's when you had the time to have the big breakfast, and I had my ham and eggs and grits. Oh, don't get me started. My biscuits, all this, and you have to wash it down with your milk, right? I would be in such a stupor, and by the time Friday came, because I didn't have enough time to have the big breakfast, I was sort of bouncing in, and I didn't realize until after I said, oh, wow. And I remember I took this allergy test. I was getting sicker and sicker by the year. By the time I was in my mid-30s, I was getting these allergy shots. And I was never stupid. I was getting one every 6 weeks, and then every 4 weeks. When it got to every 2 weeks, and I was in my mid-30s, and I remember saying to myself, and I lived in New York City, and I'm trying to say, I don't like my doctor that much. Why am I doing this? I had a great plan. I could afford it. It didn't cost me a dime. But I didn't like him that much. I liked him. He was a nice guy. But I didn't want to be spending the rest of my life spending time with my doctor. So I said, there's something wrong. And one of the things, I remember taking this allergy test. And I remember, and people, when they talk about they have allergies, I kind of smile. Because when I took this test, I was allergic to 103 different things, including my first wife. I'm saying, what is this? And I was. I get closer and I start sneezing. I said, honey, I got to leave you. The doctor's ordered. I was allergic to her perfume. I was allergic to everything. You want to know something? I'm not allergic to any of those things anymore. It had nothing to do with it. One of the things I was allergic to is a substance called Avidin, which is in eggs. So that's why I'm saying, once you understand this, and so I don't make general comments about people's issues. What I do is I say, well, tell me a little bit, and I love talking to vegans and vegetarians. I have them, they come and sit in my office, doctor, we're going to have to talk about the other laws of health because I have a perfect diet. So I sit there and I listen. I said, tell me a little about typical breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then they look at me with horror when I said, your diet is so terrible that even a little adjustment will give profound effects. And then once they get over what is this guy? And I start going through, because people, I don't know where they're getting their ideas from. Well, I do know where they're getting their ideas from. American Dietary Association, all these other things. But all these food colors and dyes and all these things that are in packaged things, really good for the food industry. And it titillates the palate. But it's not doing us any good. And it's killing our kids. And some of the kids it's killing are the lovely kids that God loves, but they're our grandparents and great-grandparents that's winding up with Alzheimer's and this and dementia. These are God's children. So we who have grandparents, we need to take care of them because how the world revolves, they're becoming like kids. So you got to slap them on the hand in a nice way, loving way, to get them back on track. So all of these different food allergies is in that thing. Is that one of the things that we should avoid? And what I have here is and this is in this book that I talked about earlier, the Ways to Wellness book. 25 healthy snacks. There's all kinds of healthy things that you can do for our kids, and it's interesting. Some of them, as you start going through it, they taste so good that when you start going to the other, you say, "Wow, there's something wrong with this." We get so adapted to the snacks that aren't good. You know, one of my favorites is I do an ice cream. Or I have this pie that you take figs and dates, and that's the crust, and then you put in your frozen peach through the thing, or strawberries. I do this fruit pie, and when we have company and we give it to them, they think it's real ice cream. It is tasty. So you can take natural things and do some absolutely delicious things. So you can you know, people talk about breakfast. One of my favorite breakfasts that I talk about in here is, what about a fruit, nut, and seed breakfast? You know, you cut up some apples and put some blueberries and some strawberries in there, and make your own almond milk and pour it on there. It is absolutely delicious. You think that you in a garden of paradise. I mean, there are natural things that you can do. So there are natural snacks, there are natural foods, and we talk about celery is perfect as a kind of a midday snack if you're hungry. So there's a lot of different options, and that's one of the things that we try to help with. So, you know, rather than you getting a phobia to your kitchen and your cabinets, here's some things, some practical things that you can do. And like I said, don't run home and throw away everything. Now, some things, I remember when I got baptized, I said, you know, I'm going to change all my ways. And in my old secular days, before I was baptized in 1993, we were the party people. I lived in California. We had the best alcohol. We had Black Label, this, and I don't even remember them. It's been so long ago. Red Label, the best gin from Russia. And I remember I said, you know, that's it. And I remember we had all of this alcohol. Not that I wasn't a big drinker, but we were the party people. So, you know, they come to our house and then alcohol was it. And I remember talking to Elise, said, you know, who can we give this to? And we said, well, wait a minute. If it's bad for us, is there anybody we don't like that much that we want to give? Yeah, right. We poured all this in. And I remember we had, you know, these recycle bins. We had 3 recycle bins. I know that guy, he said, these guys must have had some party last night. And we must have thrown away literally hundreds of dollars worth of alcohol. So I say that, but some of these things, it's not doing anybody any good. I haven't even poured down the toilet. You probably kill some fish for some of the foods that we have there. Okay, tip number 4, feed the mind and the brain. This is really important. I don't have to spend a whole lot of time here. We talked about the frontal lobe this morning. Just for context, remember, it's 2% of the body. 3 of the body weight, but we're the largest in brain to body size. You know, elephants have a larger brain than humans, but it's less than 1% of their total body. It's like 0.15. Ours is 2%. We have the most pounds, and then look at the consumption. It needs 20% of the circulating blood, 20% of the oxygen, 75% water. It generates 10 to 23 watts of electricity. It can power a light bulb, and all studies show that diet and lifestyle affects it. So it's really important. And for kids, it's particularly important that we understand baby brains. Each person has about the same number of brain cells at birth that you have as an adult. But those cells grow, reaching their maximum size by age 6. We really got to be careful in those first few years of life. That's why as much breast food that you can do, as much as good natural stuff that you can do in the beginning, the better off they're going to be. You raise a child in the way it should be, and then later on, when they start having these, they'll come back. And yes, Greg.
What about vaccines?
Oh, will you be nice? You want to finish my presentation? Okay, I'll get to it. You're right. Oh boy, that's real important. I'll let you help me with that one. Exercise in the brain stimulates the creation of new neurons throughout the entire life. So it's really important to take care of our brains. All kinds of problems with childhood. And I want to go through this quickly. Like I said, sometimes I have too much fun up here. But I want to respect your time, and I do appreciate you coming out. But some of the points I want to make is newborn children's development. It shows that the brain damage from the various issues that are involved with their dietary issues, seeking constant gratification, no adequate friendships, aiming difficulties on others, irresponsible, sexual abnormalities. You notice that these days there's a lot more issues with bisexuality and homosexuality, this whole nurture nature. Interesting. I don't want to get into a philosophical or religious discussion, but a lot of these issues can be traced directly to some of these things that we're doing to damage our brains and its proper functioning. Temper outbursts, verbally and physically assaultive, no sustained friendship, all these different issues. Intermittent early use of alcohol. Suicide. The highest rate of suicide among kids exists now. And we talked about these things this morning. Sugar in the brain, tyramine. Remember we talked about these things? Sugar, large amounts of sugar in the diet is demonstrated to impair the frontal lobe. We got to take care of it. And why is it important? Because that's where decision making is. Okay? That's where we control obsessions and things of that nature. Tyramine confuses the brain cells and is found abundantly in wine and a lot of rich foods, but a lot in cheese. The more you know, the better off you are. Arachidonic acid. The Bible tells us very clearly, avoid pork. The Muslims and the Hindus understand this real well too. Arachidonic acid is highest in pork and affects the functional integrity of the brain. A lot of people have this issue, well, we got to have meat, and if we can't have meat, got to have beans. Remember I talked about beans the other night? I said I was going to come back to the bean issue? Good old beanie. A lot of us are going to projectile ourselves to the promised land with all these beans, with all the gassing and bloating that we can't handle. And this is a chart I like to use to talk about, and the whole meat. You got to have meat. I see these nutritionists. You got to have your protein. There's one of the biggest myths and misconceptions. I have an hour and a half presentation. I'm only going to spend no more than 2 minutes. You can start your clock. Just to talk about a couple of real issues about protein. Protein is one of the biggest health issues out there. Us going after this holy grail of protein. Let me make a couple of points. There's no diet of sufficient calories that doesn't have sufficient protein. You can have a 100% fruit diet and get all the protein you need. Just look at the animal kingdom. Job says, look at the animals and you learn about God. Where do these animals that we eat and get their protein from? They're not drinking milk and eating meat. As a matter of fact, when they do that, they get sick. They get it from grass. Grass or oats. They get, most of them are grass. Those are the best and the healthiest. The reason I put this up here, getting enough protein, this is the diet on the left that I used to have before, when I thought I was on bacon and eggs and toast and juice and milk and burger and fries for lunch with my soda, of course, dessert, meat, potatoes, salad, bread, butter, snacks. Sound familiar? Now, I've weighed this about 140 to 150 pounds since I was in the 8th grade. At least when I was 18, I remember looking at my old draft card. What is this guy talking about? They used to do drafting? Back in that old century, they used to do drafting. You have to have a draft card. I was 147 pounds. And I'm about 140 to 150 pounds right now. Same as I was when I was 18 years old. What did I need 4,200 calories for? And 160 grams. Now, 160 grams of protein. Let me show you how warped we are on this whole protein issue. The United States Dietetic Association says that our protein requirements, this fancy formula to make them sound real smart, basically comes down to about 1/3 of your body weight. So if I'm 150 pounds, it says I need 50 grams of protein. Now, if you go to the WHO, the World Health Organization, same scientists, graduated from same schools, all of a sudden your requirements are 20% of your body weight. What's going on here? The only thing that's different is 2/3 of the world is vegetarian, so they're not bought into all of this meat, and they don't have these these food interests and lobbies. So according to the WHO, the World Health Organization, I needed 30 grams. According to the U.S. Dietary Association, I needed 50 grams. 160 grams. I was killing myself. Let me give you another lesson in physiology. Carbohydrates and fat are 3 atoms, right? Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The difference between a fat and a carbohydrate is the concentration of hydrogen or carbon atoms. And so same thing. Protein adds either a nitrogen or a sulfur atom. It is very difficult to break it down. It's very acid producing. Your urine is from the breakdown of protein, causing uric acid. It leaches the body. Look at all of this. I was killing myself trying to keep up with balancing out all this acid I was creating. It creates havoc on the kidneys. You know, we used to think that it was sugar that caused diabetes. It's too much protein, tearing up the kidneys so it couldn't function well. Now, the point is, the ideal diet, as I started to change, and so this might be more of a typical diet. When I first made the transition, juice, fruit, oatmeal, toast, salad, vegetables, brown rice, salad, vegetables, potatoes, you know, one of these wimpy, nothing diets, juice, veggie snacks, 1,850 calories. So I still made the 2,000 calories, but look at the protein, still 51. You know what your protein requirements are? I told you what the USDA says, and the WHO. The latest studies are saying you need about 6 to 9 grams. So what about if you're pregnant or if you're a world-class athlete? Well, you might need 15. Way lower than what these experts. So this is the master physician. This is the expert we should be looking at. There's nothing here that says we need to be eating all this meat. And if we needed the meat, he would have gave it to us in the Garden of Eden. He gave us fruits and vegetables on each side of the river, the tree of life. And the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the plants. The fruit is for our consumption. And it's interesting, we didn't have meat until after the flood because there was no vegetation. And there's a lot of other interesting things that go with that, but let's not get too carried away here. Now this is another very important chart. Can anybody see? I hope you can see this. This is powerful. There are 22 amino acids. Depending on who you talk to, there's 20, 24. The key is there are 8 essential amino acids. Everybody agrees with that. They don't agree with the total. That's not important. But everybody agrees on the 8 essential. The interesting, now what does essential mean? It means that your body can't manufacture it itself. All of the other 14 amino acids you make out of carbohydrates, out of potatoes and rice. You make those amino acids. And even when you eat whole meat, you have to break it down to its individual amino acids before you can use it. So it takes a lot of energy to break down that meat because the body knows what you need to make hair and nails, and you can't make it out of cow meat or pigtails. I used to love pig's feet. But anyhow, you have to break it down. True confessions. I want you to understand, you know, I didn't just come down from heaven. You know, I've had a life. So don't say the guy is mad. At least the guy was normal at one time. Okay. Oops, what happened? Okay, help me. Come back. Okay. Did I find it? Okay. These are the 8 isoleucine, leucine, lysine, etc. These are the 8 essential amino acids. Every single one of God's manufacturing facilities has all of the 8 essential amino acids. All of them. You can have in my book, I talk about all of these athletes these world-class athletes who are vegan. You know, there's a lot of athletes out there that are not telling people. One of their competitive secrets, they're not telling people they're vegetarians. And you're looking at some of these guys are having enormous results. Vegetarians always win the stamina contest. If you hold 10 pounds out here, the vegetarian wins all the time over the meat eaters. They're stronger, but they don't have the stamina. All plants. Now look at this. This down in the corner here. This is the recommended requirement. for all of these amino acids. Can you see that? That's really low down here. The point of this is, even if you have a diet of 100% sweet potato, just sweet potato, just potatoes. Don't get me started on broccoli. They tower over your, there's no food that doesn't, of sufficient calories. You can be on 100%, God forbid, broccoli diet, get way more than what your essential amino. That's what the point of this is. There is no diet of sufficient calories. As a matter of fact, a lot of times when I give these presentations, and people look at me and say, well, a wind can blow you over and this, that, and the other thing. I ask them, tell me one diet of sufficient calories of any kind of food that doesn't give you your proteins. The scientists, the medical doctors, sometimes I do with these ground rounds. They're a lot of fun when you get all these doctors. And you always get a Heckle and Jekyll in the back who always have some comment to make. But when you really get down, they can't come up with anything. Name one protein deficiency disease on this planet for insufficient protein. You can talk about when you don't have enough B vitamin, you get berry, enough vitamin C, you get scurvy. You can't make, and any of the diets you come to that has nothing to do with the protein, they're starving. They're not eating anything. There's no diet that doesn't give you the protein that you need. Okay, we talked about a little bit this morning about this, so I can start catching up a little bit. Medications that can affect your mind. And there's a lot of them. We talked about some of them in terms of adults. But we know our kids. They have the asthma, the caffeine that's in a lot of medicines, the mood altering drugs, the Ritalin and everything. They're starting the kids. Did you know that that's a special class of drug with heroin and everything? You need a special permission. I forgot the particular category. And some of these drugs are interesting. A lot of them are political. Did you know initially, when Nixon came out with the drugs that were on the list, the ones that were banned, heroin was off the list and caffeine was on it. But because of the food in it, they fixed that real quick. So some of these things, these drugs that we think are terrible, are actually better than some of the things that are legalized now. The antihistamines, the decongestants, and there's our friend. Oh boy, this is one of the biggest issues. And we love our children. And even now, I have to be very careful about how I talk about it. There is so much political and economic power behind it. You've got to be very careful about how you proceed with this subject. But vaccination is terrible what it's doing to our kids. And all the problems that we have with ADD, ADHD, and brain injuries, etc. And people don't know. I tell you about when I first met my wife, we both worked at IBM. And she knew I knew a little bit about stuff. But when she got pregnant, after we were married for about 6-7 years, and she was pregnant, and we, I never really had to talk about the vaccines because it wasn't an issue. And then the vaccine issue came up. And she said, well, Jimmy, you're one of the smartest people I know. But this is my kid. I got to protect her. I said, what are you talking about, Lisa? I mean, she's been living with me all this time. I said, even in my own house, I can't have peace. And so I said, okay, because I loved her. She's very pretty. Where is she? Is it Lisa here? Okay. I love her. So I said, and see, one of the things I tell people, I don't tell people what to do. I teach them. And if they insist they want to do it, I have this, one of my favorite presentations is vitamins for sinners. So if you're going to do that, so I believe if you're going to do these stupid things, if you're going to go to war, I don't believe in war. I'm a conscientious objective. But if you're going, I say, wear a helmet and a shield. Don't go out there bare-chested and get those spears. At least put a shield on. So what I said, well, okay, Lisa, I know some things that we can do to mitigate the damage, to lessen the damage. I said, but read this. I gave her this little thin pamphlet. She read it. She said, oh, wow. You have anything more? She is worse. She knows more about vaccination. When she started reading this stuff, there is no valid double-blind, placebo-based study ever for vaccinations. And when the first one came out in the 1970s, what was his name? Jenner or something? The guy came up with the cowpox vaccine. Here's another one of those things where statistics don't lie, but lies use statistics. And I remember, I never really paid attention to that. I went for my naturopathy study, and then you go into more detail. One of the things, when I didn't know anybody, they talked about how his son was vaccinated, and he never died, never got cowpox or smallpox. As I started studying, I said, oh yeah, but he died at the age of 21 from some unknown disease. And so you start, when you read the rest of the story, boy, this stuff is devastating. The things that we are unwittingly doing to our children. And they telling us, they crying, they're making faces, they hollering, and a lot of them, it's so sad when they get these parents. They said, yeah, that's exactly what happened. By the third booster, that's when he lost all of his coordination. I had this one pastor, this is the saddest story. He had this kid who was 2 years old, was ambidextrous. He wanted him to grow up to be a pastor. He had a full vocabulary. After the third booster, and didn't even realize, because I asked him if he was vaccinated, he said no. And it wasn't after months of being and he was getting better and better. I'm going to tell you what I did. And I said, I don't know, let me tell you the end of the story, because we don't have time for a lot of these stories. He called me about 2-3 years later. He was in tears. I mean, it affects me. He said, my kid, he went and he put the video in it. He took a bath by himself. The guy was teaching himself. He had all these words. And I remember joking him when he came in, he said, that dream can still happen. For 20 years, he was having an average of 7 paroxysms a day. We got it down to 2 or 3 a month. And over a series of months. And it was down to almost non-existent. And every now and then when they slip back to some of these food things, it triggered it because he's in a compromised condition. He doesn't have that solid basis. But he started getting his vocabulary back and everything. Now it takes years for the central nervous system to develop itself. These vaccinations are really having, you remember we talked about, we all have different requirements and capacity. Good news is it only affects less than 2% of the kids that we talk about. It's probably more than that. But that's what we'd admit to. Look at the things that are in vaccines. And when my wife saw this, and the biggest things are that thimerosal, the mercury as a preservative and aluminum, as an adjuvant. An adjuvant is something that enhances its ability. And pus from sores, diseased animals, horse serum, fecal matter, urine, macerated cancer cells, formaldehyde, phenol, gelatin. And you know, and Muslims, they won't touch this stuff. Because of the pork and some of these other things that are pork-based. Aluminum phosphate, retrovirus SV40, contaminated polio, all of these different things, squalene, all these carcinogenic things causing paralysis, convulsions, coma, necrosis, gangrene, and damage to the brain and central nervous system. It's killing us. And a lot of people really don't understand this. Don't take my word for it. Do your own independent study. And the good news is there's a lot of things that you can get on the internet now that wasn't available even 20, 30 years ago when I first started studying this. And there's things that we're doing that unwittingly, we love our children. We don't realize what we're doing. Yes, Greg.
The greens detox a lot of the bad stuff.
Oh yeah, well yeah. As a matter of fact, I have the formula, the heavy metal detox formula in the book here. It's called chelation pesto. You know, they have these intravenous chelation things, but you can do it with food. And as he said, you know, cilantro is one of the most powerful chelators out there. And so one of the biggest issues, especially in the islands, is fish. And so I'm very careful. I was going to do a presentation on fish. Or maybe I will. Okay. Okay, maybe I'll change it and do that one. Okay. All right. See, what's that? Well, shingles, all of these different things is related to these chemical and heavy metal. That, you know, all of these things are affecting the central nervous system. See, heavy metals affect the central nervous system. The brain is a part of it, and the rest of the central, and the Parkinson's, all of these issues are directly related to these chemical and heavy metal toxins. But there are foods. God gave us foods that are natural chelators. And let me tell you one of the tricks. One of the things, I'm pretty much of a vegan, but every now and then, I love raw fish. I lived in Japan and I got this taste for sashimi. That, you got to be a real 9th degree black belt in fish eating to eat raw sashimi. And every now and then, it's years apart every now, I get this taste. But what I do is, and when I first started making, I was doing a little bit more from when I first made the transition. And I go to this restaurant, this Japanese restaurant, and I said, give me a bunch of minced garlic with it. To the point where I'd come in, and they knew what I'd come in like every 3-4 months, they'd have all that garlic. Garlic is a very powerful chelator. So I'll scoff up that, and I have all this garlic. I was antisocial for like 7-8 weeks. I reeked of garlic. But that brain was working, and that was nothing, no damage. So there are things that you can do, as Greg is indicating, and in this chelation pesto, I saw this food thing that you get that actually tastes good. It's so good that this pastor with his kid, after he was getting better in the family, and we did this test and they showed they got rid of all the heavy metals, they would call me like 6-9 months down. Can I still eat these chelation pesto? I said, can you still eat apples if it helps you with your account? Oh yeah, it's a food. It's so good, people can't believe it's medicine. Okay, tip number 5. We'll go through fast. We talked about this morning. The home hypnotist, infants and behavior. There's a lot of studies that show there's a real big problem with TV. That's one of the big challenges that I'm having. Can you guys pray for me? I have 2 young kids. I'm too old for young kids. My grandchildren, most of my grandchildren are older than my kids. You know, I'm a great-grandfather, and these kids are having a challenge. It's tough, but especially for infants. And I fell into this. I didn't know as much about this when I first started. And that's the babysitter. And you ever notice kids, and the kids get attracted to that. And kids are unable to judge which behavior should be imitated and not on TV. And it all goes in there and it imitates those behaviors. We'll go through fairly quickly because we talked about this earlier. When this was done, they were talking about an hour, on an average of 27 hours a week. It's more than that. I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago, and they said 8 hours a day. That's 56 hours of hypnotism and brain damage. Cannot distinguish fact from fantasy. Increases their aggressiveness. And in this particular study, it showed that the natural behavior was affected by 160% in 2 years. There's another study in South Africa. In 30 years before TV was introduced, the homicide rate decreased 7%. It jumped 130% in the 12 years after TV was introduced. They have similar studies in Canada, etc. There's one statistic, one study that basically showed that TV violence viewing at age 8 in boys significantly predicts the seriousness of the crimes at which they will be convicted at age 30. This TV is a real issue. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for me. All my doctorates and PhDs mean nothing. These kids still think they're smarter than me. And then they got these little pads and this, that, and the other thing. I mean, the things that I'm trying to do, I'm convinced this is the kind of stuff that drives you to your knees so you can stand tall. Frontal lobe extras. And Alvin Toffler, I remember one of the books I read in 1984. It talked about future shock, and it talked about all these issues. Future shock is here. And he said constant stimulation. Now, when I was a kid, you probably never heard, you ever heard of a Muntz TV? He said, what is this guy talking about? M-U-N-T-Z. Anybody? That's the TV. And it was a black and white TV. It was a big old thing. Big old thing in the and I remember when we finally made it, we got this big old TV. And you know what color TV for us? We got this paper that had blue on the top and it had orange and green at the bottom. You used to look at cowboy pictures. We got color TV. But now you got all of these different things. You got little pads and this. I mean, it's a tough issue. And they're so addicted, they don't realize it's a problem. It's a challenge for us parents. Please pray for me. I need help. What to do after pulling blood? There's so many different things. Discussing family values, etc. You know what they are. Tip number 6, teach your children how to balance play and work. And it's right and necessary for our children to have recreation, but there's a lot of other things that they need, don't they? They need to learn how to work. They need to understand how to read good books, have regular hours for physical labor. You know, we have to force our kids. They get so addicted to this. I think I told you yesterday, we did this thing, you know, each year we come up with different things. A couple of years ago, one of the things that we did during the summer break, when they have all this extra time, we read the Bible from cover to cover and things like that. So, you know, but the new thing that we did this year was that one of our schools is a certified nutrition counselor. So I said, well, this is what we do during the summer. These kids are smart when you really apply themselves. It usually takes, most people take 3 to 6 months. There's some of our students that have done it in 10 weeks. They just left their jobs and they did this full time. These kids were going some of these courses in one day. These kids are smart. And so anyway, that's what we have them doing now, trying to find creative ways of them doing some productive things rather than being on the TV. So they are limited to the TV. They have to clean their room. They have to do so many hours, an hour and a half in the morning of this, and an hour in the afternoon, so much time outside. And they don't like it. They make a lot of faces. But I'm still in charge. And actually, when they realize how smart they are, they kind of say, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting, Dad. And you should see some of these textbooks. You know, my older kid, it's called Proof Positive. It's one of the courses in school. You're familiar with that. You know, he went through that course. He's like 80% done in a week. I said, what is going on? And we're giving people weeks and months. And these kids are flying through it. So if you give them some things, there's some productive things they can do in terms of reading, physical labor, appropriate, and then they get the sense of entitlement. They think that we owe them money, that they should get an allowance. So we make them work for it. Yeah, you do all of your work. We have all these chores and everything, and then you do the mow, and you can earn your money. So we need to do these things. We need to give them some values, and that's what's happening. These kids are getting such a sense of entitlement. And it's awful. You know, we had it bad, and we just fall into it. Things are much better for our kids. But if we don't balance that, it could be very problematic as they grow older. You know, supply them with useful and interesting books, etc. So let's end up with tip number 7. Let's give our children psychological vitamins. Okay? This is really important. And so, what are those psychological vitamins? We need to give them lots of vitamin A. Our kids need a lot of vitamin A these days, don't they? Even the pretty ones like you. Do you need any vitamin A? She probably doesn't need it. You know, we need to give them some attention. We need to recognize them and listen to them. You know, even though they think they're smarter than us, we need to listen to them. We can't be impatient. We need to recognize them where they are. And you know, a lot of us are nothing but big kids ourselves. We need to treat them like we want to be treated. We need to give them vitamin approval, positive reinforcement for them, a couple of things that they're doing right. Acceptance, a sense of belonging. Because if we don't do it, some funny-looking ugly guy is going to give her all the attention she wants. And then it might be too late by the time she figures out. Accept all of our children, no matter what they are doing and where they are. And you know why? Because we want God to accept us. And I told you, I didn't live the ideal life. I'm no blueprint for angelic living. So if I want them to accept me, we need to accept our kids. And so this is a good reminder for me. I like these because it forces me to remember who's in charge. He's in charge, not me. I'm just a steward. I'm just given the responsibility for managing them for a time, but I need to do it according to his way, not according to mine. Accolades, pat them on the back. I have boys, all 5 of them, hug them. Tell them you love them. And then affection, love, hugs, and smiles. Lots of vitamin A. These are the kind of things, these are the kind of tips that will help us. The 7 tips for gaining victory over ADHD and a whole host of related behaviors. We talked about all of them. I probably spent a little bit more time than you wanted to. But I hope it was helpful. Kind of understand what a precious thing our children are. Even our children who are our parents and grandparents. Some of them are like children too. When I'm an old fuddy-duddy child, I want my kids to take care of me. You know, there's an old saying, what goes around comes around. So there are ways of making the transition. You know, each of us individuals, we all know what our family situations are, etc. We need to all make our own, our assessment. And we, like I said, there's going to be different handouts and different downloads that we have on our site to be able to help you with doing these things so you're not left alone. You know, all of us have different goals. I have different goals and objectives for my family than you might. So render explicit what your goals are. And then be realistic about what they are. And do a periodic assessment. And develop a personalized plan. So what if your pediatrician doesn't like it? It's your plan. If he likes it, then that's the right plan. And I tell you what's been helping me a lot is the Bible. Prayer, prayer, prayer. I never prayed so much until I had these kids. I thought I knew something. Until I had these kids that told me I knew nothing. And they prove it to me every day. So a lot of prayer, and then the real good books that have Child Guidance and The Adventist Home by Ellen G. White. These, I mean, there's just pearls of wisdom and support. And we have study every morning and every night, not a whole lot of time. Sometimes this is as little as 5 to 10 minutes. Sometimes it goes on because we talk about family issues. It goes on a half an hour, 2 hours. Most of the time it's just a little bit of time. But we read a little bit here and there, try to reinforce some of these things. And so they think it's not all me saying, there's somebody else who's as crazy as I am. Because, you know, our kids think we lost it. And they listen to Greg and Linda before they listen to me. Right? They're coming, my teacher said, your teacher? What about me? Tell me what this guy said. Oh, Greg told me we can do this in boats and, oh, okay. So they listen to. So bring in people that you trust and you value their opinions, not just anybody. And you know, me and Elisa, we wish you God's richest blessings as you continue to nurture your children of all ages. And so with that, I'd like to just end, as I like to end all of my presentations, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, the most important thing is to make sure that we're doing it all for the glory of God. All of the other stuff doesn't make any kind of sense unless you get that right priority, unless you get that foundation right.